So in this paper, we're going to ask a very direct question. How does adoption of generative AI by firm affect employment of junior versus seniors? Well, it's a very direct question. It's also a very debated one. So I think you can see like almost every day new news article come about the effect of AI on entry-level jobs. There are a lot of people that came out with like anecdotal evidence about how firms do not hire like junior level workers because of AI. Some people also related it to the recent rise in unemployment among college grads, which is actually now the highest among any other young groups. Actually, just a few days ago, Jerome Powell were asked exactly about this question of how AI affects employment. And he said, and I will quote, "You're seeing some effects. A particular focus is on young people coming out of college. Companies may be able to use AI more than had in the past. Hard to say how big it is." So it's a very, very much debated question. A lot of people discussed it, but actually there are not so much broad economy evidence about it until recently, until Eric and Cortel came with the Canaries paper, which we'll talk about quite a lot in this presentation. And we also try to contribute to the discussion about this question. So what we're going to show in this presentation, we're going to discuss very quickly about the literature that relate to our paper. We're going to talk about our data source, which is US, LinkedIn, Résumé, and job posting that we got from Evalio Labs through WRDS. We're going to talk about how we're going to identify AI adoption among firms. We will do that by using text analysis of the job postings that this firm posted. And finally, we're going to present our results. And the bottom line will be that following AI adoption, junior employment declines while senior employment is unaffected. We'll also try to discuss a bit about the underlying mechanism, although, of course, there is a lot of work to do about understanding the mechanism behind it. So a bit about the literature. So our paper is related to broad literature that try to look about the effect of AI on the labor market. The first wave, I think, was mostly experimental evidence. For example, a paper by Eric and Quarters, and also by Noy and Zhang from MIT. And while there are a lot of kind of diverse results from these papers, I think that most of the paper found that generative AI often complements and increases the productivity of less skilled and less experienced workers. Another strand of literature, which is very much related to our paper, is papers that look at employment patterns of occupations by exposure to AI. As I said before, the Canaries paper by Eric, Chander, and Chan from this lab is a very prominent example of it, and we will show that actually there are interesting consistency between our paper, the results in our paper, and the results in the Canaries paper. And another strand of literature, which is very much related to the methodology approach of our paper, is studies that use job posting and resume data to identify firm-level AI adoption. These are very prominent 3 papers. So now we will go more about what our paper, about the details about our paper. And so the data source, as I said before, is LinkedIn data that we got through Evalio Labs. The sample of our paper, in our paper, it's of about 285,000 US firms. These firms, for this firm, we observe 62 million workers, 157 million of the positions, and almost 200 million job postings. So what we have, our data is structured as 2 data sets, main big data sets that we merge them in the firm level. The first data set is data set of job postings of these firms. We observe job posting from September 2021 to March 2025. About each of these postings, we know the posting date, when it was posted, and very importantly, raw job description, which, as we're going to show in a few slides, we're going to use to try to detect AI adoption by firms. The second data set is positions level data. it's come from the users in LinkedIn. So if you have LinkedIn, you know that you report your position in LinkedIn, and you use these positions to understand the firm level employment. So first of all, we observe it from 2015 to 2025. We know when each position was started and when it was over, so we can understand what is the employment level of each firm at each time. So from now on, when we say employment of firm at time t, we mean the number of workers that reported that they are working in the firm on LinkedIn at this time. And very importantly, the position level data also includes seniority level variable, which is provided to us by Revelio Lab. They use some algorithms that take the worker's current job, for example, where he's working, what is the firm, what is the industry, what is the job title of the workers. They also based it on the employment history, the duration of previous employments, and the age of the workers. They take all this data, put it in an algorithm, and it provided the seniority level of each position. They provide this variable with 7 categories that you can see here. We're usually going to divide them to 2. So we're going to talk about juniors, which will be the entry and junior levels. All the results we present for these juniors will be in red. And other 5 categories, we will call them seniors together, and all the results for this worker will be in blue. So here we look at the average employment of firms over time by seniority. So you can see in the red line, you can see the average junior employment. In the blue line, the average senior employment. We can see that from 2015 until COVID, the employment of both junior and seniors was increased about the same pace. In COVID, the employment of juniors experienced much more severe decrease, but then continue to rise about the same level as juniors. But then from the middle of 2022, we can see that the employment of junior was stagnated. So, and then even from around the middle of 2023, it's even start to decrease. On the other end, if we look at seniors, we can see there is almost linear increase in the employment of seniors over time. And as I said, we also want to compare some of our results to the Canaris paper by Eric, Chader, and Chan. And you can see there are some similarities between the results of the paper. So also in the Canaris paper, for most age group, they grew about the same level until the end of 2022. But then from the end of 2022, there is kind of monotonic differential increase in employment in the sense that early workers experience much less increase in employment, and some of them even, the youngest one, even some decrease. Okay, so far we looked at employment level by seniority, and we saw some interesting results. But it's very hard to tell how much it's actually related to AI, and this is what our paper tried to do. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to try to detect which firms actually adopted generative AI technology. The way we're going to do that, we're going to look at the job postings of the firms, and we're going to look which firms recruited at some point AI integrator. It's important to say that it's very closely related to the methodology of M. Paul et al. 2025. And what do we mean by this AI integrator? We mean a worker that integrates generative AI technology into the firm's workflow. And the idea behind this approach is that if there is a firm that actually recruited a worker to integrate AI technology in the firm workflow, they're very likely to be actually AI adopters. However, as you might already think, there is also, it's important to note that there are probably some type of adoption that we don't capture. So this is a very specific type of adoption about firms that actually integrate AI into their system and do some structural change. There could be some type of silent adoption, as we call it, that we don't capture. For example, you can think about a firm that just the workers started to use ChatGPT. We don't going to observe this in our data. So we think that there could be, in some sense, some false negative, which means there are some adopters that we don't capture, but we don't think we have a lot of false positive in the sense that the firms that we actually identify as adopters, we think with very high probability actual adopters. And this is image form that we generated with AI, so kind of, yeah. Okay, so a bit more details about how we identify AI integrator postings. So again, it's important to note, it's kind of very related to the approach of Ampor et al. And so we have the whole universe of our job postings. It's almost 200 million job postings of all the firms in our sample. And optimally, we would like to give all the 200 million job postings to LLM and just ask it, tell us which one is AI integrator, which one is not. However, it's not very feasible in terms of computation and time. It's consume a lot. So we're going to use approach of first filter it by keywords. And then what we have left, we will give to the AI classifier. So first, all these 200 million job posting, we checked whether they include at least one of a list of keywords. Let's see if this bottom is going to work. Yes. So this is the list of keywords we used. Keywords is very much focused on generative AI. Okay, it's quite broad list, and we wanted to look if include at least one of them, we will take this posting to the next step. Okay. So, however, although it's quite extensive list, we see that 99.7% of the posting we got in our dataset do not include any of these keywords, and we have left with 600,000 postings that include AI-related keyword. And then for this 600,000, we're actually going to ask the LM classifier whether it's actually AI integrator posting or not. And we have left with 132,000 AI integrator posting. You can see it in red, in green here, sorry, which is 0.07% of all the posting in our sample. So it's very, very distinct postings. So let's look at example for AI integrator postings. So this is one of the 132,000 posting we identify as AI integrators. Sorry. And this is a posting for generative AI developer consultant. And we can try to understand why the LLM classifier actually identify it as AI integrator. And we can see in the third bullet of the responsibility that one of the responsibilities of this worker is to integrate AI model into existing system and application. So it's pretty clear, of course it's illustrative example, why the AI integrator actually classify this AI integration. So this is kind of the job that we think about when we say AI integrator postings. On the other end, you can see one posting that include one of the keywords of AI, generative AI, but is not classified as AI integrator posting. So it will be, So it will be one of these postings that it is with keyword, but not AI integrator. And we can try to see why. So this is a posting about senior security engineer. And we can see there is some mention of large language model in the third bullet of responsibilities. But there is nothing about the job posting that actually describe the workers that come to integrate AI postings. So this is going to show what we try to actually show what we mean by AI integration. It's not just any postings that mention AI. It's really about someone that come to integrate AI technology into this workflow of the firm. So far we talked about AI postings, generative AI integrator postings, but what we're interested is about AI adopting firms. We want to see which firm is adopting, we will define it as adopter. So we're going to define AI adopting firms as firms that posted at least one of these AI integrator vacancy. So if you had at least one of these 132,000 AI integrator posting, this firm will be defined as a AI adopting firm in our data set. So it's about from now on, we're going to talk about adopting firms that's not adopting firm. This is what we mean by adopting firm. Here in the graph, we can see the cumulative number of adopting firms over time. And so it's like So for each firm, adopting firm, we actually put what was the first time they posted these AI integrator postings. And we can see that until 2023, there were very few firms that actually posted one of these AI integrator posting. But since 2023, when ChatGPT started to be much more of a big deal, the number of AI adopting firm was increased sharply until we got to more than 10,000 firms, which is the sample of our AI adopting firms. So we have 3.7% of our adopting firms as AI adopters. But as we're going to show in the next slide, these are very, very big firms, unproportionally. We're going to talk about it more. So while they are a very small share of our sample, just 3.7%, they actually include more than 17% of the employment of the positions in our sample. So let's look a bit more about,
So it's 70% at the end of the sample in 2025?
So it's like we took average over from 2015 to 2025, average of all the employment, how much comes from adopting and not adopting firms, and yeah, that's the number. Yeah, please ask a question, of course, if something's not clear. So here we want to compare a bit descriptively between AI adopters and non-AI adopters, just to kind of get a sense of what is this AI adopting firms. And we see, for example, here we look at the median size of the firm, and we see that the median size of adopters is much bigger, as I said before, than non-adopters. So the median size of AI adopting firm is 100, while the median size of non-adopter are only 37. We also look at the median share of junior versus senior. So we see that adopters has much higher median share of seniors, is almost 60%, while for non-adopter is only about 40. Here we look more about the distribution across industries. So in purple, you can see the distribution of adopters across industries, and in gray, you can see the distribution of the entire sample of firm. We can see that a lot of these adopters, maybe not surprisingly, come from professional services and information, but we still have quite meaningful share also in manufacturing, in finance and insurance, smaller share in education, retail, and healthcare and social services. And if we compare it to the all firms sample, like the entire universe of firms, we can see that mostly adopters, again, maybe not surprisingly, are much more concentrated than the average firm in the information sector. And now I will give the stage to Seyed, who will describe more the results.
In the rest of the presentation, I'm going to start with providing some descriptive results, and every step I'm going to try to move forward toward the more serious empirical analysis. So let's start by just looking at the employment of junior workers in adopter and non-adopter firms. Here we see the average number of juniors in those two types of firms. The solid red line shows this for adopters, and dashed line shows this for non-adopters. And as we can see, at least starting from 2018 up to early 2023, on average, these firms are having the same trend for the employment of juniors. So this is all normalized to be specifically the same at the 2023, but they're following the same trend for a long time. And starting from early 2023, you see a very sharp trend break in the sense that adopting firms experience a very large decrease in the number of juniors, while non-adopter firms stagnate or decrease slightly. So this is the first descriptive result we can see. And if you compare this to the paper by Eric and co-authors from this lab, you can see a completely different data set is telling you the same story, which is very encouraging for us about data limitation that LinkedIn can have. You see that occupations that are more exposed to generative AI, the number of juniors in those occupations, starting from early 2023, late 2022, have experienced a sharper decline or stagnated more compared to occupations and juniors in those occupations that are less exposed to generative AI, which is consistent with what we have on the left. We can look at the same descriptive result for senior workers. Again, we show adopters in solid line and non-adopters in dashed lines. And the message that we want to take from this picture is that for senior workers, you don't see that trend break that we just saw for junior workers. They continue to grow on the same trend that they had, which is, again, encouragingly, is quite consistent with what Eric and co-authors find in their Canaries paper, that there is no trend break for more exposed or low exposed workers once you look into more senior workers in those occupations. Very good. So if you want to do this a bit more formally, we can just estimate a difference in difference regression in which we regress log employment at firm I in time t on a set of dummies that are time dummies interacted with the adoption dummy, which is 1 if a firm is adopter and 0 if not, controlling for time fixed effect and adopter fixed effects. And if you plot those beta j, what you will see is the relative employment of juniors and seniors over time, how they compare to each other compared to non-adopters. In red, you can see the result for juniors, which is not significantly different from 0, starting from 2015, quite early, up to 2023, which means on average, adopters and non-adopter juniors are following the same trend. And in early 2023, actually in 2023 Q1, you see the trend break and the relative junior employment in these adopter firm goes down compared to non-adopters. On the other hand, if you look at senior workers, you see that in blue. From the start of our sample, the seniors in these adopter firms are growing faster compared to non-adopters. As Guy just showed, these are very bigger firms, completely different firms. So it makes sense that they're growing faster in terms of their senior employment. But interestingly for us, the junior workers were on the same trend, and the trend break started after 2023. So if we want to come up with one headline figure, one headline number for how seniority biased this technological change has been, we can estimate this triple difference in difference, which is again very similar to what Eric and co-authors do in their paper here. We do it with adoption instead of exposure. So we regress log employment of firm I at seniority level S, so for juniors and seniors at time t, on a bunch of dummy variables for time interacted with a dummy for being an adopter and interacted with a dummy for being a junior. We control for our lower level interactions. And also importantly, like Eric and co-authors, we control for firm by time fixed effect. And what this provides for you is that it allows completely flexibly to different firms follow the same different patterns over time. So if there are sectoral shocks, there are different idiosyncratic shocks to different firms that makes these firms follow different employment paths over time. This takes care of that. And then we just compare juniors and seniors in the same firm at the same time in adopters compared to non-adopters. And then if we plot that beta j, we can plot the relative junior employment compared to non-adopters. So relative to seniors and compared to non-adopters. That's what the triple diff is basically. And again, you can see the trend break starting from 2023 Q1. The headline number that we got from this is that relative employment of juniors have gone down by around 13%. There is a slight downward trend before that, which is quite consistent with what I just showed you in the previous plot, that because seniors are growing faster in those firms, you see that the relative employment of juniors, which is relative to seniors, is going down, but the trend break is quite obvious starting from 2023 Q1. Very good. So we saw that junior employment is going down. What are the mechanisms behind this? So there are two main stories that one can think about it. One is that once these firms adopt generative AI, they just don't post new vacancies. They do not hire as much as juniors as they used to. The other story is that they do mass layoffs. They just fire everyone. They fire a lot of people. So our LinkedIn data can be thought of as a matched employee-employer data, because you see which worker is working at which firm for what period of time. And this allows us to look at hires and exits and quits of workers and see what happens after 2023 for adopter firms. So we regress what we call flows, which is hires or exits, on a very, again, a standard difference in difference specification, where we have interaction of dummy for adopters and a dummy for post-2023 period, controlling for firm and time fixed effect. And what we see in this table is that the main driver of this decline for juniors is a considerable decline in hiring. So adopter firms after 2023, on average, are hiring around 3.6 fewer juniors. And if anything, separation has also gone down for these firms. So this can be interpreted in two ways. Because these firms are becoming smaller, with the same turnover, you have fewer exits. Or you can also interpret it partly because these firms are hiring fewer people, will become more cautious in exiting their jobs. But the message is that the hiring is the main driver of this decline in the stock of employment for juniors. The next step, we try to see how this decrease in hiring is consistent across different sectors. So is it just coders? Or is it consistent across broader sectors of the economy? We estimate the exact same regression, this time for broad sectors in our data separately. And these 7 sectors, as Guy also showed you the distribution of them. And we saw quite consistent pattern that the junior hiring has gone down for adopters in these firms post-2023 for AI adopters. But the senior hiring has quite stayed constant or increased slightly, which is broad across different sectors. Okay, great. So far, we only compared adopters and non-adopters over time, and we didn't use the fact that these adoption happens at different points in time. Why did we do that? One can think of one good reason is that we look at these AI integrator job postings. We think that this is a very good proxy for a firm being an AI adopter, but the exact time that you post this AI integrator job vacancy posting is not necessarily the time that you start to use AI in your company. Probably before that, you've been experimenting something with AI, and this is like the high bar that you move, okay, I need to hire someone to come and integrate AI in my company. But we have the data from those job postings, the exact timing of those job postings. So let's see what we can get out of that. For this, we can estimate another standard staggered difference in difference, as economists call it, or just an event study where you look at what happens before and after a firm adopts generative AI. So we see that after we estimate this with the method of Callaway and Santana, which takes care of a staggered nature of treatment adoption, treatment timing. What the result shows us here is that after a company post about AI integrators, the number of juniors, like 2-3 periods after that, starts to decline by around 6%. But on the other hand, we see that pre-returns are not flat. So these firms, before even they post about an AI integrator role, start to decrease their juniors quite earlier than that. One story that one can think about is that, so they are doing something with AI. Which sector is most likely to do something with AI before posting about AI integrator? Obviously, that one can think of coders. So the information technology sector, next code 51, can be the driver of this result. So one standard practice that we try to implement is that let's just exclude the coders from the sample and estimate the exact same regression across all other adopter and non-adopter firms. And once we do that, and when you do that, so this is for all firms, once you just exclude the workers, you get much flatter pre-trends in the sense that the trend of junior employment before posting about an AI integrator in those other firms is quite consistent with each other. And a few quarters after you post about an AI integrator, you start to see a decrease in junior employment in those firms. So these are different empirical strategies that we use. Each of them has some pros and cons, but all of them are pointing toward the same story for us. Great. To wrap up, we use data from LinkedIn resumes and job postings in this project to see what is the effect of generative AI adoption on employment of juniors and seniors. We detect AI adoption by what we call AI integrator from job postings using an LLM. And our result shows that following AI adoption, the employment of junior workers starts to go down while the employment of seniors is unaffected. We showed that the main results driving the main force behind this decline is a decrease in junior hiring and not exits. We show that this pattern is consistent across broad sectors. And we also use an event study to take seriously the timing of adoption, and we find the same story going on. And that's it. I think we finished a bit earlier, but thanks everyone for having us, and it was great to be here.
Thank you. So we have some time for questions. Let's bring you. Okay, here comes the mic. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Thank you for the presentation. So I was asking for the event studies, right? So you mentioned you have two data sets, one by job posting and one by positions. So for this one, are we looking at only the postings?
No, log employment, as Guy mentioned, is coming from the positions. So you count how many workers are reporting on LinkedIn working at this firm. So all of our employment data comes from positions. What posting gives us is the AI adoption. So if you post about bringing an AI integrator into your company, you're defined as an adopter, but the employment data comes from positions.
I see. So a follow-up is that like the event time is defined by like when they post about AI.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, we just want to emphasize actually that all what we showed about employment is come just from the position. It's a bit confusing. The job posting was used just for the adoption. Most analysis was just to detect which firm is adopted or not adopted. Here we actually use the timing of job posting to actually understand if we can think about it as timing of adoption, which I don't know, maybe, but yeah.
Thanks for the very interesting talk. One question I have is that it seems like it's potentially possible that in the future, people will just leapfrog over these jobs. And so if people have the skills, they will not be hired in a junior role. They will immediately go to middle level. And so what I'm curious about is whether you see any form of heterogeneous treatment effects. For example, if the junior people have generative AI experience, are they now getting hired into more advanced roles?
That's a great point. Thank you. We have to think more about it. We haven't looked at this exact thing, but we do a kind of similar exercise in the index, if I find it here, is that we estimate this regression this time for promotions. So we look at juniors and what is the relative difference between promotions from juniors to seniors in adopters versus non-adopters. And you see that actually the promotion in adopting firms also goes down. So if you're a junior in adopting firms, it's less likely that you get a promotion after 2023. But absolutely what you mentioned has more to it, and we have to look into it. Thank you so much.
And it's also showing that exits go down.
Which is
less likely, yeah, it's like what you said before. You're less likely to get hired, less likely to get fired,
right?
To get promoted.
Right, but because the decline in hiring is bigger, so the stock goes down.
Yeah, I have two comments. One is about the posting that indicated the large language model was wanted, but for the security person.
Right. Yeah.
So my comment is that I was just recently at a conference, a commercial corporate conference for called API World, where all of these APIs are being used for all sorts of different things, and especially they want to use these chat GPT and those sorts of things to devise workflows for using these APIs. And so then in this particular role, senior security engineer, I could see how a large language model would be actually very desirable for use in that workflow. So I'm not so certain that you can exclude this posting from your data set. Okay, that's the first thing. And the second thing is that I sit back and just anecdotally think of, well, what would the executives who are faced with a new technology, how would they want to drive their hiring or even promotions or whatever when they're faced with this new technology and that they've been told that they have a very high level perspective on it, and they're going to say, well, hey, I'm not really that knowledgeable about it, but I'm not going to trust a junior person to figure it out for me. So they might just introduce delay into their hiring process there, right? And people who are trying to get those junior positions are going to have to figure out, well, how am I going to write my resume so that I can show that I could fulfill whatever that need is coming up. So I don't know whether this is a temporary phenomenon or not. Maybe we could look back at past technological changes and see if this similar evolution of the hiring process is observed?
Yeah. So first of all, about this posting, I think that's a great point. I think, as we mentioned, it could be, very much could be that we have a lot of false negative in the sense that there are firms that are adopters or there are postings that are about AI integrator, but we don't capture it. We were more focusing on trying not to have any false positives, that the firms that, like, the postings who actually classified as an AI integrator are actually indeed AI integrators. Of course, it's like 200 billion posting. We definitely missed some, but we were focusing more on the false positive part. And I think about the second comment, it's very, very good point, and like we need to think about. I think there is some sense, and we see the fact that, for example, this comes from hiring and not from layoffs. There is, and that it starts relatively early. I think this can be consistent, and it says it with a lot of caution. It can be consistent with a story about firms start to adjust even before actually automating jobs. They start to adjust their hiring process because maybe it's easier to slow down hiring than later do layoffs, maybe. So it's good. And then, like firms that maybe think they might automate jobs later, they start very early. It could be that at some point they will, like it would look more as a temporary thing, and at some point they will return to hiring more. It could be something that is just firms that are very much exposed or adopters just adjust before AI actually starts. Yeah.
So this is a little bit related. Well, first off, it's worth noting that if you did have some false negatives, which you probably do, that would tend to reduce the effects. You know, it would make it harder for you to find the effects.
Right, of course.
Yeah. So related to the timing, there's a question. You know, and you went over this kind of quickly, but I think that just it'd be worth fleshing it out a little bit more. Zhupeng Wang online asks, how do you rule out the possibility the decline in junior hiring reflects broader macro or industry shocks, such as the Fed rate hikes or tech funding slowdown? AI adopters are heavily concentrated in the information sector. How do you distinguish the effect on that sector's overhiring from subsequent overcorrection? So it's sort of two related questions about the alternative hypotheses. So say a little bit more about those stories.
Sure. So one thing that I mentioned in the triple diff analysis is that we have firm by time fixed effects. So if tech companies are more sensitive to macroeconomic shocks, if they're facing some idiosyncratic shock for some reason, if there's a new act, like Jobs Act, that deducts R&D expenditure for these firms, reduces that, this takes care of that. This allows different firms to be on different trends flexibly, and then compare what remains from that variation over time and compare to adopters versus non-adopters. So these time fixed effects and firm by time fixed effects, to some extent, capture these time varying shocks. Of course, if you assume that adopter firms are for some reason more sensitive to macroeconomic shocks or to other shocks, then it could be that part of what we attribute here to AI adoption be driven by that macroeconomic shocks. The other thing that we try to work on is that this event study is a bit stronger in that sense, because it's not just post-2023, before 2023. It actually uses the different timing of adoption. Like if you're 2023 Q1 and I'm 2023 Q4, then we compare what happened after I adopted AI and you didn't, and what happened after other firms are added to this AI adoption. So all of these are some effort to control for these things. Of course, none of them are perfect, and it could be still that.
There was also some big interest rate hikes in the middle of this period, and they were quite striking. And we were talking earlier, you can go far enough back that there were other interest rate periods. Say a little bit about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So one other concern is that in March 2022, Federal Reserve started to raise interest rates to combat inflation. We know that once you raise interest rates, the economy slows down, hiring goes down. That's what economic theory at least tells you. And if you assume that, like, for some reason, by itself, it is not an issue for us. The assumption that you need for this is that, again, these adopter firms or junior in these adopter firms are more sensitive to interest rates, then you can say, oh, this is interest rate and not AI adoption. One way we tried to think about this is that, okay, let's look at the previous rate hike by Federal Reserve, which was at the late 2015, and see what happened to juniors in these two types of firms after Federal Reserve rates raised the rates. And we see that there is no trend break as sharp as we see post-2023. Of course, it's still suggestive. It could be that the macroeconomic situation is different in 2023, but that's the way we try to think about this.
Once you have this up, Were you surprised at how sharp the break is there in 2023 first quarter? I mean, I guess that was the rollout of ChatGPT, but did you expect that people would almost instantly change their hiring?
I think first of all, yeah, we were a bit surprised by it. It was kind of quite sharp, and we said it also in the triple diff results. I think this could again come consistent, but I said it again with caution because we don't have in the data something we can observe it directly. With like when ChatGPT came out and there was a lot of hype about it, it could be that some firms started to adjust to AI even before they actually adopted AI in the sense that AI started to automate actual tasks. It could be they reacted to the hype, and then you can see some, I think, more sharp change around this when ChatGPT was introduced.
Questions? I think, here we go.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Cameron Turner, I'm a Stanford Stats alum. I'm interested in sample bias, and especially at the top level, and whether you or Revelio did any normalization against the sample that you're using, Bureau of Labor Statistics or US versus rest of world, academia versus industry, that kind of thing.
Yeah, of course, this is LinkedIn data, so we expect this to be a bit tilted toward white collar fancy workers. And like if you're an Uber driver, you don't probably have a LinkedIn profile, or if you're a software engineer, you're more likely to have a LinkedIn profile. Here we show that, of course, like information sector is overrepresented. So it depends on the question that you want to ask to some extent. If you want to see what happens to college-educated young people who just come out of college and are trying to find a job, then I think this data is quite relevant. If you want to extrapolate this to the aggregate economy unemployment rate, then you have to think seriously about how representative your data is. But of course, this data has limitation in the sense that some sectors are overrepresented.
And I think like that's one of the reasons we're so encouraged by the Canaris papers that Terry brought, that it's another data that also have some limitation, but very, very interesting, impressive data set that actually tell in some places you see that tell very similar story.
Questions up in the back?
Hi, I was wondering what effect that might have internally on companies. How will they adopt and adapt? Will the junior level positions just fall away and we will just move forward with only senior levels? You wonder then what happens, however, how it will project into the future, or what do you see there?
I think the answer is like, I wish I could tell you. It's a very, of course, big and super interesting question. Our data does not allow us to answer this too much. So I don't think I have, other than intuition like you have, I don't think we can say much about it. Also, we have like, our data is just about the first 2 years of, since generative AI was introduced, mostly was introduced, of course it was before, but when it becomes such a common thing. So I think in 2 years, it's a bit hard to say, like data from 2 years is a bit hard to say what it will do in the long term.
Or about how you define junior versus senior folks. And there was the earlier question from, I think, Emma, about, maybe some people jump straight into more senior positions, even if they're relatively new. Any evidence of that?
Yeah, so the short answer is this is, so the way we define seniority level is, as I said, is about this variable we got from the value lab that uses some kind of algorithm that use a lot of data about the current job of workers, about employment history, about the age of workers, and then they come one of these 7 categories, and we divided, as we said, as you can see, to the juniors and seniors in red and blue.
Right. We also do verification.
You separate out like age from their current job. Revelio gives you these categories.
We verify this. So in the paper, we don't have it unfortunately in the slides, but in the paper, we have an appendix where we look at the words that are more likely to appear in the job title of these 2 types of people. And intuitively, you see that for these red guys, entry and junior, words like assistant, intern are more likely to appear. For those higher level guys, words like manager, consultant, specialist, engineer are the prominent words. So intuitively, you see that these 2 variables that Revelio Lab provides makes some sense. Unfortunately, LinkedIn doesn't provide age variable as best as we know. And then on the jumping, like not going through the junior process, what we've done so far is looking through about the promotions, as I showed you, and we show that also goes down in these firms. So if you're a junior in those firms, it's less likely you get a promotion.
So really raise that. So you showed earlier that the adopters tended to be much larger or significantly larger than the non-adopting firms. Have you tried comparing, like-sized bins of firms that are the same size and whether the effect happens there, or is this something that's the big difference between the firms?
That's a good point. So in the event study that we do, we can control for the initial size. So if you're worried about the different firms with different size are completely behaving differently for some other reason, you can condition all of this analysis on the size at the baseline period. So let's look at firms' size at 2018, fix that, and then compare adopters and non-adopters within that size range, and then we see quite consistent results again.
That's great. Control for that. Are there any sort of different heterogeneous treatment effects that like some people have told me they thought that startups were more likely to hire junior people that are experienced? I don't know if you can specifically separate out startups, but you might look at firms less than size 10 or 20 and see if they have a different trend than firms that are over 100 workers.
That's a great point. We haven't looked into it, and we definitely want to do that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Like Tom, here, I'll give you the mic.
Can you say something, or did you look at the relationship between what field the job was in, like in the ONET categorization of job type, for example, where the AI adopter is hired, the AI integrator is hired, versus where the senior hires, what type of jobs those are, versus junior, where those are?
Sorry, that's actually a great question and great idea. We didn't look at it too much. We were more focusing on adopter versus adopter, but actually it will be interesting to look more like the job actually characteristics. So yeah, thank you for the idea. We'll look into it.
I have a question about the shocks. So I'm in strategy, and when I look at this, your shock is about the firm adopting. It seems natural that the CEO would say, let's put money in AI. And of course, the stock markets expect them to then hire less because it's a resource constraint. So I'm wondering about the narrative you're telling, because all of us are thinking, an AI is replacing junior jobs, but if hiring is mostly of juniors, right? So isn't this potentially a story of strategy? The firms that are adopting are, of course, going to also hire less, because that's a trade-off.
Investors expect you to have fewer workers to show you that you're more productive, and that's what happens. That's the story.
There's only so many dollars. If you spend more on capital, you have less for labor. Is that?
It depends on the model that you have about firm decision making, right? If you think that firms are rational profit maximizing, then firm does what it does for its best to maximize their profit, and then they're not going to suboptimally decrease their employment juniors. But if it's very likely to think about other frictions, psychological behavioral frictions that makes firm to show off performance, or to if they are financially constrained and for some reason they're doing the wrong action with the amount of funds that they have, that could be correct.
We do kind of a placebo test and see if adoption of some other technology or some other kind of investment had any effect on junior hiring, and see if AI behaved differently than, I don't know, you could look at some other kind of indicator of investment. Sure. That wouldn't be that hard to do.
Thanks. Very good idea. Thank you.
Thank you for it.
So I also was wondering if this was just a short run, kind of temporary effect. And so you look at Gen AI here, but maybe there's, as Eric's suggesting, other things like predictive AI or other kinds of digital transformation might see a similar effect. Maybe it's not just a Gen AI effect. And then my other thought was, I hear a lot of anecdotal reports from CTOs and CSOs, and it looks like there's some descriptive evidence as well out of MIT that a lot of these Gen AI projects are not going so well for the firms. I mean, this is similar to Eric's previous work with co-authors as well, that there's this adjustment time period and you get a downward dip while the firms are making adjustments. So I want, maybe there's a future project, but looking at the firms where they are getting some productivity benefits, or they're doing this better versus firms that are doing it worse. And so I wonder if there's some insights into what the hiring patterns are of firms that are getting more productivity benefits out of this.
Yeah, I think that.
Sorry, just there is this paper by Hampola and co-authors, 2025, that they look at predictive AI. So their sample ends at 2023, but it's a very interesting paper in the sense that they look at what happens when a firm adopts predictive AI, and they find that it reduces labor demand in one sense, but that's my best understanding of it. You can look at the paper. But because these firms become more productive, this allows them also to hire more, so it kind of offsets. So if someone is interested in predictive AI, there's already a great paper. This paper by Hampola and co-authors, it's on NBR website, looks into predictive AI and doesn't find, I think, a big effect on employment.
Yeah, I think also the question of long-term, if the mechanism, unfortunately, the data it's a bit constrained about this question. It will be for example, we cannot observe the profit or the productivity of the firm, so we don't know if this reduction in junior hiring come with some reduction or actually increase in profit. It will be very interesting. Maybe talk to this question. We think about trying to merging with more data, but we're still not sure if we can do that. And yeah, I think one thing is long-term question will be answered in the long term, I guess, unfortunately.
Match the firms up to any other data set. You don't know the identities of the firms, is that right?
You can match them to CompuStat, which is the publicly traded firms, and these guys also do that. That's a doable thing, actually, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk. So I have a question on the interpretation for the healthcare results. So occupations in this sector are considered to have maybe moderate exposure to AI because they require lots of interpersonal social skills. And also in our Canary papers, we find the employment for both seniors and junior are pretty strong. But I saw in the figure 5, actually the coefficient for senior hire experienced the largest change, which is above, this one, about 20%. And also for juniors, there's a significant drop. So I wonder, what is your interpretation for this healthcare result?
That's a great point. So first thing to note is that these are very tiny amount of firms that this is about adoption, not exposure. So if it can be that these healthcare services are just automating their call centers. It's nothing to do with the actual healthcare process. And also so that's the more thing I can tell you. Of course, it's about the exposure. This is very much less exposed, and in the aggregate employment haven't been affected. This is just relative adopters and non-adopters in that firm. So if 2% of firms in that sector are adopters, 98% are not adopters because they're not exposed, then this is just a relative effect of those tiny few firms in this sector that have adopted this technology. But on the aggregate, this sector is not affected that much because it's less exposed.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think that makes sense. But in this very early diffusion stage, maybe many sectors still have very low adoption percentage. Will that affect the interpretation for the results?
I think it could be, first of all, we need to look more into it. As I said, it's kind of still preliminary paper, but it will be interesting for us when you think, who are these firms that actually adopted in these sectors that are not the most exposed? It's probably very, very specific firm, maybe very techy firm within this sector, so it's not representative of the sector probably. Also, I will emphasize about the seniors results that as we saw in the diff and diff, when we saw it as a time trend, we saw that there is a lot of pretrends. So we will not want to too much interpret the senior results, but for the juniors, because there is less pretrend, we feel a bit more comfortable.
Yeah, that's good.
Another question there?
So as also your paper supported, we are economically in adjustment period, and in adjustment periods, Accentures and other consultancies tend to have a higher business rate. So have you double clicked on that, whether hiring of junior consultants or especially AI adoption consultants increased? No.
It's a good point. So the professional services is the sector at which these consultants are working, and one of the most consistent and biggest decline that we see in our data is coming from that sector. A lot of our adopters are coming from that sectors. If you look at this slide, so yeah, more than 30% of all of our adopters are coming from the professional service sector, which is, as you expected, is a prominent sector in adopting AI. Yeah, did I answer your question or?
Right here, I'll give you the mic. But let's say that the professional services, right? I would expect that, for example, the share of adopters would be much higher.
As Guy mentioned, maybe you should answer it.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, we've really much focused on trying not to have false positive. Probably we have false negative in the sense there are different types of false negative we can have, like firms that were adopted and we didn't capture. For example, the silent adoption of like firms that just started using AI. Like the type of adoption we find is actually firms that come and integrate AI technology in their system, in their workflow, which is very specific and very high bar of adoption, I think. I think as Eric mentioned a bit, like this is actually could reduce our result. Like if we have in the control group also adopter, so in this sense, because that's why the reason we wanted to be more conservative and focus more on the negative positive, like to try to reduce them.
So it could be that 90% of firms in professional services are opening their laptops and using ChatGPT. But the thing that we look is a very high bar of adoption, as Guy mentioned when he presented, is that you specifically hire someone to bring to your company and ask them to integrate AI to my workflow. So you bring a software engineer to set up your API for your LLM. This is a specific type of adoption. That's why we see it's a high bar and fewer than you expect.
Here's a question, is a bit of a follow-on to that. So Bharat Chandar, who's online, he couldn't be here, has a question. So you look at AI adopting firms versus non-AI adopting firms. But you don't look at AI occupations within those firms versus non-AI exposed firms. But you could, in principle, like Ruyu and Bharat and I did, look at more exposed firms and more exposed occupations and more exposed. So have you considered doing both that and see within the firms, is it the more exposed occupations that are being affected?
That's a great point. We definitely can do that, and we should do that. And that's on our to-do list. We haven't.
Yeah, it's like this was raised already and about the ONET codes, and we definitely can and should do that.
Awesome, great. I think we have time for one more quick question somebody wants to ask. Okay, well, thank you so much, guys. That was amazing. Really appreciate you coming all the way out here. What a great way to start. And so next week, we're going to have more on this theme. In fact, Ruyu and Bharat are going to present the Canaries paper, so you can get a little comparison building on all of this, and I'm sure some of you will have additional questions for that. So we'll see you next week, same time, same place. Thanks very much.